Sam Clovis is the national co-chair and chief policy advisor to the Trump president campaign, and he's on our guest line now. Colonel Clovis, welcome.
Tom, it's great to be with you.
Thank you, sir. Let me ask you a question. I kind of know the answer to this. People who have any knowledge of Mr. Trump and his candid way of dealing with things would know the answer, but you're a close advisor to him, so I want to ask you. I was driving in this morning and listening here in Dallas-Fort Worth to Mark Davis, who does mornings on 660 AM The Answer, and he had a caller. They were discussing whether or not Christians could vote for Donald Trump given the sort of, language that he used on that tape that was released on Friday. And he had a Southern Baptist lady on with him, and she said, you know something, Mark? I would vote for Satan. I would vote for the Prince of Darkness himself if he were running against Hillary Clinton. Do you think that would please Mr. Trump if he knew that?
I think he would. That's pretty remarkable.
I know. I was astonished. But that is a big debate. A lot of Christians are saying this guy's not the perfect person, and he even said, Sam, on his apology Friday night that he released on video, I never claimed to be a perfect person, and he regrets what he said. Now, what more do people want him to say?
Well, I do think it's very interesting that we see the strength of the evangelical leaders in the country that are supporting Mr. Trump, and they've not abandoned him at all. And I think a lot of it is because those of us have gotten to know him, know the journey that he's been on to his faith. And I think that this is one of those episodes that occurred in a time in his life before he turned the corner on this. I think he's, as I think Jerry Falwell has said, and James Dobson and others have commented on the fact that he's a new Christian. This is a person who has revitalized his faith and over just recent years. And for many of us who've been on a faith journey for a long time, we all understand this. We all understand how this evolves. And I think this is why evangelicals are sticking with him regardless of the gutter talk that took place on that set.
At our house, we call those baby Christians. And it's not meant in a derogatory way. It's just, you're starting your walk, and it's just amazing to me that people can look at the language, which I do not condone in any way. You don't. He doesn't. No. He said he was embarrassed when he heard it. I've got a daughter. I've got a wife. But unlike these congressmen who are all racing to push each other out of the way of the microphone so they can talk about how horrified they are, we have to look at reality. It is a binary choice. And whether or not you think it's a perfect choice, you yourself, previously worked as the Iowa director for Rick Perry's presidential campaign. Right. Until August of 2015, you've not started out with Donald Trump, but you moved in that direction, and now I know you're proud to be associated with him.
I am. And I think a lot of it. I'll tell you the quick story about if you don't mind, just 1 minute on this.
Yes, sir.
I had talked to Mr. Trump before I had signed on with Governor Perry. But this goes to his character. And I told Mr. Trump, it says, I appreciate the opportunity and perhaps at some moment we could do this, but I promised Rick Perry that I would support him if he ran for president. And Mr. Trump looked me square in the eye, says, I appreciate that. You're a man of integrity, but I want you to know if anything ever happens, you'll always have a place on my team. He honored that promise that I made, and I thought that for me that showed me a lot, and that's what made it easy for me after the Perry campaign hit some difficulty for me to sign on with Mr. Trump, because he understood and he honored that, and that takes, I think, a big man to do that. And that was one of the reasons that I signed on with him, is because he understood my promise. And I think this is something that I think a lot of people need to understand, that if he says something, he means it. And this is quite different from the other candidate. And I know Mr. Trump, and I wish other people would know him like I do, because I know if he says something, he means it, and he'll do it.
Has the campaign ever given any thought? When I looked at that, talking with Colonel Sam Clovis, the national co-chair of the Trump for President campaign, Sam, has the campaign given any thought to, I don't know how you refer to it, maybe a fireside chat, maybe he buys a half hour, kind of like Ross Perot did back in one of the campaigns where he would just come on and talk? I wonder if to get over the top of these network people who are so biased against him. The only thing I didn't like about his apology on Friday night was the fact it was on this set that looked kind of like the Tonight Show. And I thought if he'd been in Trump Tower in front of a fireplace with a picture of his wife behind him,
right,
it would have been more homey and the optics would have been better. But he does, he is Donald Trump. He does what he thinks is right. Has he given any thought to maybe just having that kind of conversation that you suggested where people could get to know him better without reporters yelling at him or without, mobs of people behind him?
I think that we're looking at all the different options that we have available to us. We take a look at what's going to be the most effective. Timing is critical. What's going to have the most impact, and I trust Kellyanne Conway and Steve Bannon and David Bossie. I trust them because I know all of them, and I really David Bossie is a dear friend of mine, very close friend, and so I trust them to do exactly what they think is best to suggest to Mr. Trump. But make no mistake, Mr. Trump makes the decisions on the campaign. And I think if he thinks that's what'll work, then I'm sure that's what'll happen. I mean, campaigns are different and they're dynamic, and every day things change, and you have an ebb and flow. And I think we still haven't seen the other shoes drop for Mrs. Clinton. I wonder how she still is able to maintain anything because of the fact that this is a person who probably should be in jail. I mean, if you and I had done those things, we wouldn't have escaped the scrutiny of the FBI or the indictment or the presentation of evidence to a grand jury, and I'm certain the Attorney General would have tracked us down. So I think this is really one of the things that we're faced with in this country is whether or not we can have a flawed human being who's a Christian who's working his way back on his faith, or someone who clearly has no moral center and who's going to be in charge of wants to run this country. That's the most frightening thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, understood. Funny you mentioned David Bossie. He was just on with Mike Gallagher, I think I want to say maybe a week ago. And interestingly enough, when you talk about Jerry Falwell Jr. or you talk about Ralph Reed or some of the other people who have been so vocal in their support, Dr. Robert Jeffress from First Baptist Dallas, standing with Mr. Trump despite these controversies. Just as an aside, when they were raising money for Haiti relief on the Mike Gallagher show, and Mike mentioned that, before he started talking politics, David Bossie said, "I'm so proud of what you and your listeners are doing to raise money for food for the poor because my church is very involved in Haiti." And he told a story about a school that they support there. And there are a lot of people who are ardent, faithful Christians who aren't buying into this idea that since he is a flawed human being, we're all sinners, Sam. We know that. That's what the Bible tells us. So, but there's so many people who are just, I'm so disappointed by a lot of my Christian friends that I see on Facebook and going, please, it's not that they aren't going to vote for him. They're trying to get other people not to vote for him. And you go, what is the alternative? What's the alternative to voting for Donald Trump?